Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's commentary. No one expected the global economic order to fracture on a quiet morning. Yet, that is precisely what happened. When Donald Trump announced that South Africa would not be invited to the 2026 G20 Summit in Miami, this was not a routine policy adjustment or a minor diplomatic dispute. It was a political detonation, one powerful enough to send institutions into shock and force governments to reconsider assumptions they once believed were permanent. For more than 2 decades, the G20 rested on a single unwritten principle. Membership was inviolable. With one declaration, that covenant was shattered. The message from Washington was unmistakably blunt. The United States was willing to weaponize the very foundations of global governance. Shockwaves rippled instantly through Berlin, New Delhi. Brasilia and Beijing analysts were asking whether the G20 itself could survive such a precedent, because once a rule like this is broken, it cannot be repaired. The world that follows is permanently changed. What made the moment so consequential was not merely South Africa's exclusion, but the signal embedded within it. If Washington can unilaterally strip a country of its seat, then global cooperation ceases to be multilateral and becomes conditional on ideology, conditional on alignment with U.S. narratives. This was not simply a violation of protocol, it was a warning shot to the global South: stay in line, or risk erasure from the global table. In that instant, the myth of a neutral and stable G20 died, and the world entered a new era in which institutions built to unite could now be used to divide. If the exclusion was the explosion, Trump's justification was the accelerant. With a single post on Truth Social, he invoked allegations of horrific human rights violations in South Africa, language long used by fringe groups, non groupa. This was not merely an accusation, it was a political weapon. Trump's framing was stark and uncompromising. South Africa, he argued. In international politics, however, such language does not simply identify a problem, it manufactures an enemy. The enemy Trump constructed was not a government or an administration, but an entire nation accused of racial brutality. Diplomats across Africa saw the statement as a deliberate provocation designed to undermine Pretoria's global standing. Human rights organizations warned that this framing risked inflaming racial tensions within South Africa and exporting instability into the global arena. In Europe and Asia, analysts recognized something even more dangerous. A U.S. president was now willing to weaponize racial narratives as an instrument of foreign policy. This marked a deeper rupture. When diplomacy shifts from evidence to emotion, from data to identity, institutions no longer resolve disputes, they amplify them. Trump's accusations reframed America as posture toward the global South, placing moral judgment first and multilateral cooperation second. Human rights language was no longer treated as a universal principle, but as a strategic tool, selectively deployed to justify exclusion, punishment, and erasure. Agriculture was transformed into a racialized fault line cutting straight through the global order. South Africa did not respond with restraint. It responded with defiance. Within hours, Pretoria delivered a message calibrated not for Washington, but for the world. If South Africa is excluded, the G20 itself loses legitimacy. This was not bluster but strategy, positioned at the crossroads of the African Union, BRICS, and the non-aligned movement. South Africa understood its leverage. Senior diplomatic figures dismissed Trump's claims as fabricated, reckless, and racially inflammatory. Then revealed the true pressure point. Several countries were prepared to boycott the 2026 G20 Summit if South Africa were forced out. In a single move, the crisis was inverted. What began as Washington punishing an alleged offender transformed into a global revolt against us overreach. Across Africa, South America, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, the same question echoed. If South Africa can be expelled today, who will be next tomorrow? At its core, Pretoria's stance crystallized a defining truth. The G20 is either a forum of equals or it is nothing at all. Washington did not pause. It escalated. The exclusion evolved into a broader campaign against South Africa's diplomatic standing. Aid was suspended. Pressure intensified. Then came what had once been unthinkable, the expulsion of South Africa's ambassador from the United States. The rupture reached its climax during the now infamous Oval Office meeting. President Ramaphosa arrived, seeking stability. Trump arrived, demanding submission. From the outset, the meeting was adversarial. Trump insisted that South Africa acknowledge systemic racial violence as a condition of legitimacy. Ramaphosa refused. The encounter collapsed without agreement, without reconciliation, and without a path forward. By that point, the reality was unavoidable. This was no longer a bilateral dispute. It was a confrontation over whether global institutions would be governed by consensus or by coercion. For 20 years, the G20 had survived on one assumption. Membership was unconditional. That principle was never written into law, but it was universally understood. Trump's decision did not bend that rule, it destroyed it, by asserting that participation could be revoked at the discretion of the host nation. The United States erased the line separating multilateral governance from superpower dominance. Institutions do not collapse when attacked from outside. They collapse when the rules stop being universal. The crisis exposed a truth long whispered within BRICS circles. Global governance is no longer about cooperation, but about control. Once that architecture is perceived as biased or punitive, an alternative future begins to take shape. BRICS, once dismissed as an economic curiosity, now appears increasingly like a counterweight, expanding, institutionalizing, and positioning itself as an alternative to Western-led framework. If this trajectory continues, the world does not merely drift, it fractures. Markets divide, supply chains realign, standards split, and the global economy evolves into competing ecosystems with rival loyalties. For 3 decades, that illusion is now broken. Trump's exclusion of South Africa was not an isolated incident. It was a signal that the next global order will be shaped not by cooperation, but by competition between rival centers of power. History may not remember the accusations that triggered this crisis, but it will remember what they unleashed. The beginning of a world divided into 2 economic civilizations, staring across a divide they may no longer be able to bridge.